Are you or your clients looking for a regular income solution with compelling returns to diversify your portfolio? If so, Neighborhood Holdings may be a great option for you. Listeners of this podcast will appreciate that public markets can be turbulent and finding a good private credit fund can be tough. But Neighborhood's track record, transparency, and investor alignment sets it apart from the pack. With nearly 10 years of consistent performance and a target net yield of 8 to 10%, Neighborhood has a track record of providing monthly income to investors without the volatility of public markets. How do they do this? Where banks invest in mortgages up to 95% loan to value, they also make borrowers jump through a lot of hoops. Many borrowers in transition aren't able to meet those hoops. Neighborhood has partnered with banks and brokers to provide quality borrowers with temporary financing secured by first mortgages at an average loan to value of less than 60%. Where other mortgage funds might take more risk by lending against construction, bare land, or jumbo loans, Neighborhood is focused on your average residential borrower who owns the average house in the neighborhood. Plus, their variable rate with a floor mortgage pricing benefits investors when interest rates go up and mitigates downside risk. Check out the link in the description or visit neighborhoodholdings.com to view the offering memorandum or speak to your financial advisor for more information. That's neighborhoodholdings.com/Loonie Hour. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this information discussed today is not intended to be or construed as investment advice. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a Looney in any of these financial markets.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back.
People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment.
We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble.
Welcome back to the Loonie Hour, episode 162. As always, joined by my friends, the three amigos here, Boomer, Keith Dicker, Rich Diaz. What's going on?
Well, it's so I've been what's the word to use? Not convinced, maybe told or strongly suggested by Mrs. Icecap that I'm going to join our friends every Wednesday night for trivia night at the little place that we go to hang out. And I like trivia. Trivia is awesome, right? Except when the categories are the environment, current day pop culture, and I don't like 12th century French art or something like that. I'm useless.
You'd be more of a bingo guy.
Well, compared to that, I am. However, when it comes to like current pop, apparently I didn't even know. Who's the lady that married the English prince, the American lady? I don't even know her name.
Janet Yellen?
No. You don't know either. Anyway, she was an actress apparently, and her picture's
She's from
up on the
Suits.
screen.
She's from Suits. I can't believe I cannot believe we don't know this.
Anyway, I have no idea who this lady is, and they're all looking at me. They're saying, "Are you sure you don't know who this person?"
Rachel from Suits.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm now committed to this, so I have some strong team members. That's good, and they do serve some drinks while it's happening. But that's been
You start changing shirts with people.
There are some nice shirts in the room. I'll give them that. What's going on with you guys?
Well, I love trivia, which will surprise absolutely nobody. So if you need a ringer, Mrs. Icecap, I will step in and I'll be happy to join you. I love 16th century French literature and all other.
Well, I would like if it was, like 80s TV show or 90s rock or football trivia. I'd be pretty, useful, but not for and the topics never change. Every week it's the same.
No, it's got to change. It's got to change. But what are you doing, Steve? You look like you're in a different place.
I'm on vacation, baby. I missed the Loonie Hour though. Just in Hawaii. This is kind of a regular occurrence for us. So this is our spot.
That's great.
So Steve sold like 0.000004% of his crypto to take a month vacation.
Let's go, baby. Dog with hat to the moon.
That's right.
We're gonna get into that this week, despite Keith's angst about the crypto market.
There's no angst.
We've also promised our listeners we'd have a Bitcoin guest appearance by somebody at some point in the future. So
maybe we're calling the top. Maybe that's
no, it's for sure it will mark the top when we have our Bitcoin interview.
When we finally have a Bitcoin person on. It'll be
it's moving though. We'll get there. Yeah, we've got I think we touched on it briefly last week, but just noticing some things here just in the housing market to begin with. We had some of the real estate boards all reporting their stats last week. So just seeing large increases on a month over month seasonally adjusted basis in home sales activity. So Toronto up 14% for home sales, Vancouver 20%, Calgary 9%, Montreal 10%. So there's been a huge pop in sales activity, which coincides with the BOC, of course, cutting rates rather aggressively, and with consumer confidence, Rich, hit a 30-month high. So, yeah, people were kind of asking, wondering, when that was going to feed through the housing market, and at least temporarily, we've seen a noticeable bounce in housing activity. So
We did it. We saved the real estate market. All we need to do is cut. You know what? But we should just cut interest rates to zero and just leave them there forever and ever and ever, and it'll just all the problems will go away, and the lollipops and candy canes will rain from the sky, and the Canadians might win a Stanley Cup. Keith, what do you think?
So are we the first in the G7 now to do the U-turn? Is it all over?
it's all over, baby.
All over.
Finance minister
Okay.
said it's over. No, yeah, I think it's been a noticeable. I think, don't get me wrong. I mean, we're not in a bull market by any stretch, but we kind of went from a completely dead market to all of a sudden, seeing the odd house here and there go into multiple offers, and so just like I think what I'd say is like the sentiment shift in housing over the last 6 weeks has been pronounced.
My question to you, Steve, is how do you think it's sustainable? I mean, I know it's a kind of a dumb question, but do you think it's sustainable? Do you think is this just a pop because people, basically think that we're going to continue to cut interest rates forever, or is this just, is it just, how do you feel about it?
I mean, I think the one thing is, like, as I keep mentioning to everybody, is based on my conversations in the industry, like the average consumer is not aware of what's happening with the bond market, with yields, the influence that the U.S. plays. Everybody just looks at the Globe and Mail headline article and says, "Oh, the Bank of Canada just cut rate 50 basis points. Housing's going to accelerate, and we're off to the races." Nobody actually kind of does the work. And I get it, right? I mean, Keith, most people want to do trivia about celebrity gossip and not on finance, right? So nobody asks, hey, what about the orange man getting into power? And we're now seeing yields backing up on the long end of the curve. And this is pushing bond yields higher domestically here in Canada, right? Your 5-year fixed mortgage rate is priced off of that. Those yields have been pushing higher. And so we're actually seeing the fixed rate mortgages moving higher right now, despite, the Bank of Canada cutting rates. So I think that's where the rubber is going to meet the road.
Whoa. Have we ever talked about that before?
What?
Yes.
Then Bank of Canada cutting rates, and yet mortgage rates are going higher at the same time. Yeah.
It's playing out. So I think people are going to wake up in February, March, when you're in that spring market and go, hey, what the hell? Fixed rates are still 4.2, 4.4, 4.5. That doesn't help me that much. Despite variable rate mortgages will probably be more or less the exact same. Today they're at about 5%. So they'll keep coming down.
That brings me to my next question, which is when Tiff Macklem said that interest rates were going to be low for a very long time and everyone piled into variable rate mortgages. I know it's tough to say at this stage, but what's your feel as far as how people are, or what mortgage products people are taking? Are they taking variable rates, or are they taking short term?
Yeah, the Bank of Canada puts that data out, so it's actually on their website. You can see there's been an uptick in recent months. Go back into variable. I mean, still very low as a percentage of what it used to be, because I think people are, not only scarred, but variables today are still higher than fixed rates, right? So you're kind of betting that, okay, well, the Bank of Canada, my mortgage brokers tell me the Bank of Canada is going to keep cutting. That should bring my variable down to where the fixed rates are in 6 months from now. And then I can lock in, whenever fixed rates drop further. And again, my thing is, well, maybe they don't drop a whole lot further, right? And so I think that I guess we'll see. I mean, obviously we know it, predicting these things is not easy. But I
I
think
agree
it's
with you. Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. I think that's from what you just described. Then that's an awful lot of stick handling to try
yeah,
to to get it through there. Um,
you're
okay, but with sort of the bounce in housing activity that you're seeing, we talk about in mainly coming from me. I don't know if it's right or wrong that things are slowly grinding tighter. And I get a lot of anecdotal stories about it as well. But was like I don't think we're seeing mass layoffs anywhere. Are we, Rich? Are you
no.
seeing it on your screens?
No, sir. No,
Yeah.
sir.
So I can it does
We're
make
referring to Canada,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, correct for Canada. Yeah, because it does make sense. Then it might be a bit of a lull, and I know a lot of people with money on the side are waiting to buy a home and like not a second or third property, right, waiting to buy a home, and finally they say, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and do it. So I'm not surprised that you're seeing a bit of
Have,
strength.
have you seen that chart online? Again, from friend of the show there, Ben Rabideau. He posted number of workers unemployed for 27 weeks or more. And that is just up and to the right. So basically what's happening in the labor market, to Rich's point, it's not like these mass layoffs are happening. It's just that when people do lose a job, it's taking them a lot longer to find one. And I think that's where your unemployment rate is actually going higher. It's just too much labor supply chasing fewer and fewer jobs that are available. And so it's taking longer and longer to find a job. So you're just unemployed for a lot longer, which again, I think if you're a bank lending a mortgage, I mean that's one of your biggest risks, right? I mean, if you get laid off and oh, the labor market's pretty strong, this guy's gonna find a new job in 2 or 3 weeks from now, and he can continue to resume and pay his mortgage. But I think if it takes, hey, if it takes 27 weeks or longer to find a job, I mean, how many missed mortgage payments potentially that start compounding, right? So that's the real risk for the banks.
The
Hmm.
other way you can see that, the other way you can see that actually, is the participation rate for prime aged workers. So between 25 and 54 or 24 and 55, I always screw that up. But basically your prime aged workers, your participation rate is off its peak and is now starting to fall, and it's about down 1%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but is a lot for what was actually a very high number for Canada. It was about 89% for Canada. Now it's down to 88 or whatever it is. And it's also reflected in the employment ratio. So literally just the number of people employed relative to people who are not employed, or the total population. And those are basically down to 20 odd year highs. Lows, lows for the employment ratio. So yeah, there's definitely weakness, but Keith's right. You're not really seeing those mass layoffs. In fact, the 3-month moving average of employment growth in Canada, take it for whatever you want, is 25 odd thousand. So, we're still adding jobs. And so,
Yeah, that's a bit of a random number, though. I
I
think.
know, I know that. But if you, but if you take the 12, I mean, okay, yes, it is the random number generator, hardy har. But if you
If we
take a
take the
moving average,
40-year average, adjust it by 2 standard deviations, and then smooth it out, we hit socialism.
yeah, yeah.
What's a really good, I think, thought process or conversation is really what's happening on like the immigration side, as the economy slows, as we tighten all these immigration rules. I start to wonder like how up to date or in real time our population is. Like, like it was like we went from 300, 400,000 people a year to all of a sudden 1.2 million. There were comments, near the top of the cycle that maybe we were undercounting non-permanent residents by a million people. And so I start to wonder now, as we're seeing vacancies rising in the rental market, everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, whether it's a publicly traded REIT or a local property manager that manages, a portfolio of 50 units or 100 units, they're all saying the same thing. Vacancies are rising. It's taking longer and longer to find people. I start to wonder how many people are actually have exited the country already, and is that going to play sort of into the weakness moving forward?
We'll never know because we don't calculate the data, according to our most recent guest, who was very well received, by the way, Professor Mikael Skuderud from
Go
Wasn't
Warriors.
he?
Go
Wasn't he
Waterloo
saying that you
Warriors.
don't? Wasn't he saying that you don't count when people leave?
Right. That's exactly what he said. He's like, unlike
Yeah.
Australia, where you like on your not on your passport, on your plane ticket or whatever it is, they give you a paper. You submit a
Yeah, at the
paper that
border,
says,
you gotta,
excuse me, the
or
border.
whatever.
Yes, I can't speak.
Well, they
English.
don't exactly have someone at the border, with a little hand counter, when they click it when you come in and click it again when someone
Well,
leaves. I
that's
mean,
that's what they do in Australia, apparently.
yeah,
So
but not here in Canada. I
right,
mean,
exactly,
it's
exactly. So, but that's
So we
the
don't know
Steve's
if they,
point.
yeah, you don't know if they're leaving.
Yeah, exactly.
The rental
We
market
got
sure
there.
thinks they're leaving.
That's right. All right. Well,
and that's even a better point because you have the real world, right? You have a market that's taking place, and I suspect we'll see a lot more of it. Any students that came for this year, they'll make a decision after this semester whether they're going to stay. And then after this semester, then you have the winter semester. So, people with rental properties in the Waterloo, Guelph areas and, Toronto and stuff like that. Then you're going to see what the leases are like and vacancy
They're gonna get
rates
smoked.
in September. Yeah.
They're gonna get smoked. That's gonna be,
uh,
yeah. Well, I mean, to kind of play on that point, I mean, there's been a lot of talk, again, Orange Man coming into power. What's going to happen to the borders? There's been a lot of conversations on the flip side around, are these sort of illegal immigrants going to start fleeing the US and funneling into Canada? Some coming here as, say, asylum seekers, where I'm not sure if the feds have actually tightened that up yet. We know asylum seekers in Canada has risen dramatically over the last 2-3 years. And so there's a lot of conversation online about that happening. We'll kind of see how that plays out. But I know that part of the US immigration policy and defense strategy is about pushing and nudging the Canadians to tighten up their border security.
yeah. I watched Krista Freeland's press conference. It didn't inspire too much confidence in me.
Shocking.
Where was the lack of what was the lack of inspiration from?
It was the lack of sort of acknowledging sort of that it is a major problem. I think that's the issue. I think you might disagree with. Often, I think I have a less of an issue with sort of the actual policies than having none at all. It's the waffle. It's the waffle. It's the waffle. It's like the word salad. It's the waffle of yeah. We recognize. Instead of saying like we are adding more warm bodies or we are doing this or that. That's my take on it. But obviously, I'm quite biased against this lady. So take it for what it's worth.
It was interesting with us here in Halifax. So we have a provincial election now. It was a snap election was called, and it's looking like the blue shirts should win it quite easily. But one of the main issues that everyone is talking about is traffic. Again, if you don't know, Halifax is mostly a peninsula. There's water on three sides. There's three main streets and two bridges, and bring a pillow in your car with you if you want to try to do it. So, a lot of the conversation is how do we make traffic better? And I'm listening to everyone discuss it, and all of their solutions is to treat the symptom, right? Everyone hears that and they say, "Oh yeah, of course." So then I'll ask someone, "Well, what's the problem?" "Oh, the problem is traffic." And I'll say, "No, it's not the traffic. That's a symptom of another problem." And then they look at you and say, "Well, no, the problem is there's the traffic. It doesn't move. Maybe we will rip out the bike lanes and things like that."
Oh no, Rich.
Yeah, Rich is all over that one. But the problem we have, again, if you come here like any city, I'm going to make up the number. If anyone can, share with me what the real number is. So Jack Luke, you're a realtor. You follow the podcast. Let me know. Just send me a note. I bet you on the peninsula, we're going to have 40,000 new people coming in the next year with all the new buildings going up. And at least, so if you got 40,000, say 10,000 new cars are coming in. So the problem is not the traffic. The problem is the population growth, from a very microscopic perspective. So it's the same thing, everywhere we go here, the infrastructure is getting stretched to no end. And again, they're trying to put band-aids on it. Let's make the roads a bit wider, which is hard to do, of
Hey,
course.
Stephen Gilboa said no more roads.
Well,
Did
I
he
know
say no
actually,
more roads?
Keith, you've been dancing around the solution to this problem this whole time. The real answer is to ban cars. If you don't have any cars, then there's no
Commie.
traffic.
There's the commie.
In life's irony, I disagree with that because really, in it's my view, maybe I'm wrong, but it sort of implies the World Economic Forum people are trying to prevent people from being independent and travel and go wherever you want to go, things like that. That's what I hear right here about these. What do they call it? 20-minute cities and everything?
15-minute
Right?
cities, yeah.
15. Okay. See, I'm trying to expand it a little bit. But the
Got those-
irony, wait, Steve, wait.
Get it. Go ahead.
It's coming out. Wait for it. The irony here is that I actually live in that city anyway. Like I bike everywhere and I don't drive around very much. I don't go beyond my neighborhood. Even that trivia night, that's not too far away. So,
You're a biker too. You and Rich, eh?
oh, I'm a major below average biker. I have no skills. My bike is old but I'm
Rich, and Jag Meat.
So you're saying this whole time that you've been advocating for 15-minute cities and you're secretly a WEF agent that's going
No, I'm not an agent. I like to be an agent. I'm watching this show now.
We got him.
Slow horses. Do you watch?
it.
Yeah, we're watching Slow Horses.
Great
Yeah,
show.
yeah. So like, I would, yeah,
Wasn't
I
it-
would be the older guy most likely. That's what I
Wasn't
would
it?
turn into.
Wasn't it Toronto actually recently where the guy said, was it Doug Ford said no more bike lanes?
Yeah.
They said before the city, any municipality wants to put in like a bike lane that the province is gonna review it.
Oh boy.
There's just too much
Okay,
traffic.
so our audience doesn't come, after Boomer here. I am not advocating for this stuff at all. I'm just sharing my lifestyle it's probably there just by default. But the bigger challenge that we have is that we continue to have too many people around. And then again, here in our little city I'm in, and I live in a beautiful city. It's an amazing place to live. We have all these towers going up, high rises, and there's a ton of people coming in, and it's going to be tough here at some point. Remember we're coming on Christmas season soon, right? Do you remember the Griswold Christmas Vacation? Remember that movie?
I have no idea what that is.
National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. You guys don't know that one?
I know what it is. I don't really remember it though.
Well, Randy Quaid has a part in it. So he's Clark Griswold's brother-in-law, and he pulls up in a nice neighborhood in the Winnebago, and he proceeds to clean out his septic tank, down through the gutters, and he says, "Yeah, the shitter's full." And I suspect in our city here now, our shitters are going to be full at some point as well. It's too many people coming in.
Hey,
everything is going to be.
You're pulling on all these threads, right? Because this is the big challenge of the municipalities, the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is supposed to go towards cities that need to build more density to accommodate the people, but the cities don't have enough money for the infrastructure because the shitters are full, and around and around we go. So, Keith, you just summarized our national issues in about 30 seconds.
Bitcoin fixes this.
Bitcoin does fix the shitters.
Oh, God.
Was that right? Did I do that right?
I think so.
Speaking of that, he's on the currency movement. Keith, I know you're a big US dollar guy. The loonies, as key theme, I think we've talked about it every episode for the last 3-4 weeks. I mean, the loonie continues to get smoked here, crossing a pretty pivotal point there a couple days ago.
But there was one more piece to that, right? Steve, you said there was also about the spread, the bond spreads. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Well, I mean, I was watching Carolyn Rogers, Rich's girl there. I was watching her interview last week where she was asked at this economic event, and the interviewer said, "Hey, are you worried about the currency and potential inflation?" And she basically, her words, not mine, she says, "Listen, we're aware of interest rate differentials, and we believe we've got, quote unquote, a ways to go." So basically saying that like we can continue to cut rates a lot more than where the US is doing, at least in her view. And a result of that would be, an internal currency devaluation. And I think we're seeing that playing out right now, which is the market's view is Keith, Orange Man gets in, economy heats up, and the Canadian economy continues to kind of struggle, and you're going to have to continue to cut rates to basically bail out housing. It really is what it is.
Yeah, one compliment for the Bank of Canada. Whenever I hear Carolyn Rogers speak, I find there's a lot of substance to what she says. She makes very good points, but for some reason it doesn't get a lot of airtime, except for on our show and from who, Steve. He's
We
really
love
into
her.
it.
Yeah,
We do love
Yeah,
her.
yeah. What one of us I think loves her a bit more than the other, everyone else. But but when Tiff Macklem is speaking, I find it's a bit hollow with what he says. Now he does come up with some big ones, like to stick the
I feel like
landing
that guy
and
would
things.
would dominate the trivia, eh? He looks like a real geek.
Well, he's
Yeah, I don't
gonna do
know.
better than me. I know that.
He's-
Absolutely. Because I look like the fawns when I go to these things. So, I'm not expected to be smart. Back with the currency side, yeah. Canadian dollar, it's melting lower. That's all. Again, there's nothing to get alarmed at. It continues to trend in the direction that we expect it to go. Um, Ironically, I haven't checked it, but I think if you look at the cross rates between Canadian dollar and other currencies, I think CAD might be outperforming euro, especially, and maybe with British pound, and especially like peso and Brazil real. I mean, the emerging market currencies have been getting hit pretty hard here. But this move in the FX world, everyone's focused on, crypto and equities and things like that. But this currency move has been really strong over the last couple of weeks, and we continue to watch it closely. We think there's going to be a few U-turns coming up in all markets, but
How
it is
Keith,
pretty
how extended do you
significant.
think that how extended do you think that move is? I know you're, like I said, I know you're a big US dollar guy. I think that's been one of your preferred
Yeah,
avenues.
nothing's going to go in a continued straight line here. So, I mean, one
Like,
thing, if you look
is
at
this
Canadian,
overblown?
I don't think it's overblown, but you can easily have a 5% reversal. I mean,
Mhm.
that's not a, so right now, and let's just say we're looking at CAD at 140, for example, in that world, the inversion. I mean, it's been knocking on this 140 rate maybe 3, 4 times over the last few years, and it just can't get through. It keeps knocking on the door, and no one's letting it in, which implies it'll go back down to 135. But I wouldn't be surprised at all here if the Canadian dollar shoots up to like 142 very quickly. So we have CPI data coming out next week in Canada. Maybe that could be a trigger point to cause it to go one direction or the other. But
Yeah, like if you get a hot CPI print, then you say, okay, well maybe the Bank of Canada isn't going to cut as much as we thought. Maybe that sends the Looney a little bit higher.
yeah, it could strengthen quite rapidly with that as well. And oil's been coming off a little bit. Because I mean, obviously we have a lot of markets, all markets been moving since the American election, because it's very likely that economic and geopolitical policies are going to change quite dramatically now in January. And so markets are trying to front run that, to get ahead of it. I think that's what's happening, of course. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And at some point, though, it's going to take a bit of a breather, and we try to figure out, is this the right move or not? So back to the central bank conversation, for Carolyn Rogers to explicitly say, hey, in plain language, she said, you know what, it's a strong probability that the Bank of Canada is going to be cutting rates a lot more in the future, yet the Americans may not be doing that. So that's why she said, that the divergence could increase. And what happens then in the investing world? Just say you're based in the fantasy land, overseas. You want to park 50 million bucks. Would you rather put it in Canadian dollar and get a low yield on it, or put it in the US, and get maybe 50, 100 basis points more? You're going to the US most likely. So that's what's been happening right now in that world. What do you guys see with that?
Rich?
Well, there's two things. One is the interest rate differential thing you mentioned, and one thing you sort of skated over, Steve, was that the 2-year spread between the U.S. and Canada, 2-year bond spread, is at, I think, a 20-year low or high, depending on obviously
25 year, yeah.
excuse me, 25-year high, depending on how you do it, obviously. And so what is that, 110, 115 basis points? The last time we were there was 1997. I don't know, whatever it is. I can't do math. But it's been a long time. But so that's one piece of it. The other piece is, I think, something we didn't talk about last week, but there's more and more rumblings about it, which is the tariffs. And the countries that are the most exposed to increases in tariffs are naturally the countries that trade with the U.S. the most. And so, and so obviously Mexico and Canada are obviously at the top of that list as far as who's exposed to changes in trade policy driven by the U.S. and Orange Man's new sort of policy on trade and et cetera. And so, I mean, that's also, I think, maybe a risk people are sort of, that's the market's pricing in. I think it's sort of, it's never just one thing. I think that's also what we really need to push back against. You have a bunch, if we have shitty growth, we have the housing market that needs to be bailed out. We have interest rate differentials. We've got weaker oil, and we've got potential for a trade war that may or may not come to fruition. So I think it's like, there's a bunch of reasons why the Canadian dollar is weak, and I think it's never really just one thing. I think it's important to just keep that in mind as well.
Ever been abroad and needed Wi-Fi? Download Saily. Tired of telecom oligopolies ripping you off? Download Saily. Want to avoid sketchy SIM sellers at the airport? Download Saily. Saily might be the only travel app you need. It provides an internet connection wherever you travel and saves you money on roaming fees. It's easy to use, affordable, and reliable all over the world. Saily is the modern, seamless way to get connected without the need for physical SIM cards. With eSIM technology, you can instantly activate service from anywhere in the world. No more waiting in line for a local SIM or dealing with expensive roaming charges. Saily offers flexible plans to fit your needs, whether you're traveling for work or leisure. Plus, you can switch between networks in just a few taps, ensuring you always get the best coverage at the best rates. Whether you're a frequent traveler, an expat, or just someone who wants more flexibility with their phone, Saily's got you covered. No hidden fees, no contracts, just affordable, reliable data wherever you go. Visit Saily.com/Loonie Hour for 15% off. I'm just trying to look at this from like a high level perspective though, in your case, like where are we going to be 6-8 months from now? And you've got, an administration in the US that's saying they're going to go in there, they're going to deregulate, they're going to lower corporate tax rates. Their goal is to attract more capital and increase productivity. And you say, okay, well, what are we doing here in Canada? We're increasing the carbon tax. We just increased the capital gains tax. And now we're introducing essentially a cap on oil and gas production. And I don't know. So I'm just...
Which is another tax, for lower income families.
People say, well, it's an emissions cap. It's not a production cap. I mean, again, from a first level thought process.
Steve, why don't you repeat the key words you just said about 10 seconds ago? Is the part about attracting foreign investment and foreign capital. So you just shared a view then, the US is going to attract it, and Canada is, you're not even saying neutral. In Canada, we're making policy changes that makes it unattractive for foreign capital to come in here. So by default, should the Canadian dollar weaken? Yes, of course it should.
Totally. That's what I'm saying. You layer this federal government policy on top of what the BOC is telling you. And this is like, I don't know, I'm just struggling to see structurally how you can make a compelling argument to be long or bullish the Canadian dollar. But like, obviously that seems like the easiest and obvious trade. So maybe just from a sentiment perspective, it's all priced in. But I mean, you've got two economies, I think, that are going in completely different directions.
There's one more wrinkle, which is domestic investors are pulling their money out, right? Because that's the other part. We often we focus on foreign direct investment. We want to attract foreign investors. We want to attract foreign investment. I'd like to just keep the domestic money here as well, which is something that's also, that outflow is accelerating in the wrong direction, which is also weak. Which also puts pressure on the Canadian dollar, right? If you're a domestic investor, a pension fund, which maybe we should talk about next.
Let's jump into that.
Yeah, and you want to
clearly. So this conversation is clearly catching the attention of a few lads. Let's say it, but say that. But Steve, want to introduce the next conversation, which ties in with this, of course.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I know Rich has been all over, but I think we brought it up in an episode, maybe 6 months ago, where Finance Mr. Krista Freeland said basically that they were looking at exploring possibilities where basically forcing pension funds in Canada forcing pension funds to basically have to allocate more capital to domestically here in Canada, and saying these are going to be new requirements. And so, Rich, I'll let you kind of pull on that a little bit further.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very old strategy from people who are running their economies into the ground, which is to force domestic businesses into doing things they otherwise wouldn't do. This is, Keith, what is it? It's a commie strategy? No, I'm joking. But I mean, it is sort of what we've seen in mostly in South American countries, actually. So sort of banana republic type countries, usually they see this pool of cash that is largely independent, run by people who are usually very serious about, and take their fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder returns in this, or their asset holders' returns. In this case, it could be a teacher or a nurse or not a doctor, but or a fireman or whatever it is. So whoever's in part of the CCP or CPP or whatever it's called, the Canadian Pension Plan. And so they see this pool of wealth and they say, well, we would like to get our claws into that. And so we talked about this a couple of months ago, and Freeland and now Polos, who was the former central bank, Canada's central bank governor, they're saying that we should that pension funds should be investing more. And one of the former CEO of Canada's pension fund came out very strongly and said, what I've said. I don't think it's particularly it's not the most amazing thing or enlightened subject to discuss, but I think, sorry, his point wasn't like spectacular. His point was just very solid, which is Canada should be working on encouraging those pension plans to stay rather than just siphoning off money that is really your money. It's not Christopher Freeland's money to spend or Mr. Polos's money to spend. It's your money, and those very independent and very serious institutional investors, for better or for worse, are trying to maximize returns. And so he just reiterated sort of what I had said and a lot of other people. But Steve, didn't you mention there was an article from Desjardins that went against the wiser view that they should basically keep their grubby hands out of the cookie jar?
I mentioned it.
So
it was me, not Steve.
You want me to run over it here? So it's so Canada's pension funds are underinvested in the country's public markets, starving domestic companies of capital and exposing them to foreign takeovers, says the head of capital markets Desjardins Group. The lack of investment, quote, sucks a lot of liquidity out of the market, which has impact on valuations and your ability to grow and thrive as a public company. At Freeland's request, former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz is now looking at ways to entice pension managers to invest again more domestically. So there you go. As opposed to sort of attracting it organically, they're going to do it with the stick approach.
You see, now that is a trivia night question. That's the way the conversation. I think I remember the young lady's name, Merkel, who married the British prince.
Oh, wow, we're gonna get absolutely killed in the comments. I still don't remember her name.
Well, obviously we're not strong with.
No, let's talk about this pension thing, because it's totally nuts.
Well, it's nuts not knowing the prince's wife's name.
Okay, I'm looking this up.
So with this, Steve hit it dead on as well. So I view these things, I can be a bit cynical about the world, and I think I'm right quite a bit with it. This is not Desjardins independently writing an article or a publication to say, hey, this is kind of happening, because we heard Rich talk about it on the Loonie Hour. I think this is one of these trial balloons. That's the way policymakers work. They float it out. So this is probably the third balloon now that's come out, maybe fourth. I don't know what it is, but they're trying to push this out there and try to get the conversation going with it. And I agree with Steve, and I'm sure Rich, you agree as well. It shouldn't be a policy decision to force pension managers in Canada to invest in Canada. So think about it. If you're fighting right now just to get domestic investors to keep the money in the country, boy, oh boy, it's a tough one. Like, you're really at the end of your rope right now, let alone trying to get foreign investors to come in. Change policy. The first thing you can do to encourage investment? Cut taxes. If you cut corporate taxes, say you do what the Irish do. What's the Irish corporate tax rate?
12%.
12%? Yeah. What is it in Canada?
If you include provincial and federal, it's like 30 or 28 or something, which they always, and of course, Krista Freeland always just uses the federal, which is ridiculous, but you have to use provincial and federal.
But if you cut corporate taxes down to nil, whatever rate you want to go to, all of a sudden there's some multinational company that are going to say, yeah, you know what, we are going to set up, we're going to set up our manufacturing plant here or there and do it that way. And then that'll, create jobs, foreign capital's coming in and so forth. But you can't mandate it. It doesn't work that way.
I'm just thinking about this through like a money manager's perspective, right, Keith? I mean, like think about like Canada pension fund, like as a portfolio manager of that fund. I mean, I have to think, is your fiduciary duty not to the client, which is to earn the highest return with the lowest amount of risk? I mean, on a risk adjusted basis to earn the highest return. I mean, so to say, well, hold on a minute, we're going to remove that ability because we're going to force you to allocate funds into a place where you don't necessarily want to put it. I mean, I think that's doing a large disservice to who they're ultimately responsible for, right? I mean, Keith, it would be like someone coming and say, well, ICE cap, you can't have that much allocation to the US. I mean, you're allocating too much to the US dollar. I mean, that's not in our best national interest.
Well, let's be real here for a second. There's obviously one very cool investment firm in Canada, and we know who they are. And so at our firm, we are what we call it's benchmark unconstrained, which means we would literally invest anywhere we want to. If we think we're going to make more money there, we're going to allocate more money there or less money somewhere else. So let's not get fooled with the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board. I think that's what it is. They're not, so what happens, Steve, is that they set their benchmark, their investment policy of where they're going to invest. And then based on that policy, that's where the managers will invest. So if your policy is to have 40% of your equity bucket in US equities, they might go to 42, but they'll never go below 38. So they're still not, if all of a sudden they decide, oh, well, we should have zero in the US, because for whatever reason, they're not going to go to zero. So there's still not this perfect world where investment managers will completely go in or out of a market because they have what's called career risk. If they do it and they're right, then okay, you got lucky this time. Don't do it again. If you do it and you're wrong, what happens, Rich?
You get fired.
You're fired, baby. You're fired. So
I'd imagine managing those kind of funds too. When you're trying to sort of turn or make a U-turn, I mean, it's like pulling a U-turn in a cruise ship. I mean, you're probably not able to move that quick when the market
is. It's very, very slow, and there's a bunch of investment committees, and everybody wants to prevent themselves from getting fired. Career risk is such a huge part of working at a large institution like that. I worked for a large institution like that for a while, and I've been in many, many investment committees and meetings rather, and would just watch people just basically never want to take any kind of risk. And her name is Meghan Markle, by the way, finally, sorry.
Meghan Markle.
We should have known that. Okay.
Rachel.
But anyway, but back to this pension fund. I think what's really, really crazy to me is how this is not being more vilified and derided. Because what our finance minister is saying is that Canada is not really open for business. And we need to use the power of the legislative body to force companies to do what we want them to do with your money, right? That's like that's all. I mean,
Yeah.
That is what it is. They're not even pretending otherwise.
Is that not like an element? Is that not an element of financial repression though? Like,
yes, that's one way. When you Google financial repression, there's different ways. There's keeping interest rates low. There's taxes. There's this. There's that. And that one of them is by forcing reinvestment in your country.
Okay, let's just go through an exercise here. I'm the investment manager. Rich, you and Steve are somebody in Ottawa. Pick whoever you want to be. Who do you want to be, Rich? Who are you?
I want to be Stephen Gilbo.
Okay. Who are you, Steve?
I don't know. I'll take Freeland.
Okay, so okay, let's just stop the impersonations there. But okay, so it's
Well, I
now
was going to
man.
tell you my strategy for destroying the Western economy,
Well,
the global.
okay, so let's just say that the mandate has now been fixed, and in pension funds and RRSPs, right? They can hit. That's the big one to hit. You now have to have at least 25% in Canada or something like that. And it comes to me, and we're the manager, and I'm thinking, okay, I now have to invest in Canada. Um, can I invest in this energy market the way it is?
No, you
Nope.
cannot. Energy
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, energy bad. I'm not going to get paid for that. So can I invest in the Canadian healthcare industry?
No.
Nope. Canadian consumer discretionary?
Yeah, there's a couple.
How many?
Two,
A
a
couple.
couple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll allocate. You know what? Let's just go in. I'll put all the money in the banks because the banks always make money. Okay, so all of a sudden I allocate hundreds of millions or billions to the banks. It shows up in capital on the bank's balance sheet. They're sitting there all of a sudden and they're saying, okay, we now have to lend this out. Who are we going to lend this to in Canada? We can't lend
More
it to the
HELOCs.
we can't lend it to the energy sector anymore.
Energy bad.
There's no one. Oh, more mortgages. So the housing market goes up. So I guess that's what the objective is then in the end.
But it's
Coming
also
full
another. It's
circle,
also
yeah.
crazy because like our because you made a really good point. The liquidity becomes an issue. These pension funds are so big, and the money that they move and slosh around, you can't just buy small cap companies in the Canadian equity market because you would literally flood, like you would dominate that. And so the only companies that Keith said, I mean, I guess maybe I'm repeating you, but is like a handful of telecom companies that, by the way, are sucking wind. I don't know how they're losing money, but terrible performance this year. The banks, and what you're doing is you're instead of the market telling these banks that they need to be more productive, more efficient with their capital, it's the opposite. You're telling them they're doing a great job, keep on extracting lots of excess rents from your economy, and keep not investing into your own. I mean, it's just a disaster all the way around, any which way you look at it. Anyway,
I start to wonder, Keith. I know there's been a lot of conversation, or again around the financial repression conversation, but just of where does the bid go? Not immediately tomorrow, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where you have all these governments running these massive deficits, and are there enough buyers for these bonds? And so, again, from the legislative pen, do you just come out and say, hey, banks, pension funds, etc., you need to buy more and more of this of our debt in order to finance our spending?
Yeah, I think what happens, the US is a different story. Let's just put the US to the side. I think eventually we come to a point where the central banks are just buying all the debt. So the Bank of Canada are doing QE to buy, all the debt
I mean,
issuance from
Japan's already
Canada.
there, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they've been
What
there a long time. And I know one of us here, has the wrong view on Japan. And it's not you, Steve, it's Rich. But again, it goes back to, hey, if that's such an awesome plan, then hey, let's just do it and get it over with and see what happens. But I think that's where Canada is headed. So let's just say we have an election next year, and there's a new government is formed, no matter which shape or form it's in. Um, unless they create, what is it going to be? The Department of Government Efficiency?
Yeah.
The
Doge.
Doge, yeah.
Yeah. Department of Government
Hey,
Efficiency, Doge.
which actually, jumping over, on the political side, with the Americans are gonna try this. I think it's incredibly interesting because I think everyone is going to learn a lot by this exercise. What happens, and maybe that can really help save government finances, or at least forestall the inevitable. But the challenge all the government's going to have is trying to find buyers for their debt, because sooner or later, buyers will go on strike. They're not going to buy this stuff, and they're going to allocate elsewhere. So it's going to be a real challenge. And I tell this story all the time. It's not a story, it's just a view and narrative. But we've had over a decade with no price discovery in credit markets. That's all it's been. There's been excess savings and money is just randomly thrown into the market like every 2 weeks and so forth. Now we're coming out the other side and it's getting a bit squirmy. And where's it getting really squirmy and squishy? It's
Private credit and bonds in general.
yeah. I'm thinking of an economic area, a
Uh-oh.
region. It's a
Oh,
fantasy
in
land.
Europe.
Yeah, Europe is falling apart right now. So I know Rich wanted to talk about that as well, but
Well, just to give people
it's
sort
all
of an
tied
update.
together. It's all tied together.
Yeah, I mean, partly. I mean,
Go ahead,
Europe
Rich.
has a lot of self-inflicted wounds, right? I mean, there was just another chart came out. The data is up to Q2, and it's um, Euro area residential electricity prices, and the most expensive electricity prices, including after taxes and levies in Europe, is in the EU, is Germany. And that brings us to why they're going to have a snap election, which Keith is not in March, is actually in February.
I
Late
thought it
Feb.
was April.
No,
Still though,
you were closer than I was.
is that when it's going to be a snap election
Yeah,
in
it's a snap
so 3
election at the
months,
end of
3 months
February.
away?
The joke is they don't have enough paper. Apparently, I read this article. I'm not sure if it's real, so don't at me. But I read an article that they don't have enough paper for the ballots necessary for the election. But what's really fascinating, I think, there is, and this is something definitely keep an eye on, is that a group of 113 German lawmakers from various political factions have signed an application to initiate the process to ban the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland, or AfD, Alternative for Germany, and that's amazing because they're the second most popular party in Germany right now, if you look at the polls. And so, which is wild. Now, you may not like what Alternative for Germany has to say or their views or whatever, but they are unambiguously a popular party. And I understand Germany has a history with right-wing parties, so I'm not, oblivious to that legacy. But it's wild, and I think that going into the new year, I mean, I think this is one of the most interesting stories in Europe. What's going to happen in Germany, and again, and sort of a knock-on effect is what's going to happen in France, because they're trying to basically get rid of Marine Le Pen in a similar way. I mean, she's been accused of mishandling and misappropriating election funds. She may or may not be doing that, but she's up for a 5-year ban and even some jail
I think
time.
Christine Lagarde is going to be called as a witness in that case.
Convicted felon Christine Lagarde.
Yeah. Why don't you go back to Rich? Explain in more simpler terms in Germany why they're trying to eliminate the AfD from even running.
I mean, the reality is they are a very much to put it mildly, they are an anti-immigration party. And they go against virtually everything the EU has laid out in its grand plan over the last, let's say, 10 years, which is...
So if they won the election, it would just shatter the EU into
Well,
a million pieces,
so I disagree with you there, and it would not shatter the EU in my view. What the beautiful thing about democracies is supposed to be is to course correct. So you, again, like it or hate it, Donald Trump won the election, and America is course correcting. Now, you might not like the course that they are correcting to, but in my view, that's irrelevant. And so the really dangerous piece here is, in my view, I think Europe has made some really, really big mistakes in terms of energy policy. That's obvious when you see German electricity bills are up in inflation-adjusted terms 145%. Over the last 20 years. That's insane. In the US, they're down. They've made a mistake on immigration policy. I think something like every single poll that's been done over the last 5 years tells you that the European people feel that immigration is too high. They've made mistakes on all kinds of different policies. And so the fun thing about democracies is that you can course correct. So the only way you can do that is if you listen to the people and what they say and actually take those seriously. So we've seen it in... I mean, I can just rattle off all of the the sort of the incumbents that have been kicked out, whether it's Portugal, it happened in Netherlands, in Sweden, Denmark. You've seen it in France. Across the board, people are really not happy with the direction. And so that's why I think it's such a fascinating thing to see, which is if Germany really does sort of ban alternative for Germany, it means that they're not interested in course correcting. And they're not interested in sort of absorbing sort of the will of the people, in my view. And I'm a big democracy guy, Keith. I don't know about you, but I think you should listen to people every once in a while.
I would suspect the AfD will not be in power in Germany whenever they have this. The Europeans have a way of making things go the way they want it to.
Yeah, but it's dangerous, right? Because you keep that balloon underwater, eventually it either pops or it finds a way, and sometimes it finds a way and takes a path that you're not prepared for. And I'm not saying there's gonna be a revolution in Germany. Everybody's too old and too rich, but it manifests in some other way.
Speaking of water, Steve is itching to go on the water on his catamaran in about an hour, I think.
Catamaran, booze cruise. No, it's Rich. I mean, I think to your point, I mean, yeah, like, the people, and I think certainly the polls in Canada are showing something about a potential course correction in the near future. But I don't know. I mean, I would imagine all these countries are now scrambling, right, with the results of the U.S. election, and it's kind of upended, I guess, the global status quo, right?
No, all countries except for one, the UK, which has totally misunderstood its mandate to turf the Conservatives out of after being in power for 13 years, and they've gone completely. They double down on all the policies that everyone in the world seems to be annoyed with, and then most recently,
can you give us some examples? Yeah, walk us through that.
Well, one of the most recent examples is Keir Starmer went to COP29, which is in Azerbaijan, Baku, a place I'd love to visit because it's like one of the first. It's like one of the birthplace of the oil industry. So in the late 1800s, this is where you had the first sort of pipelines made out of wood, and it's an amazing place, and it's still one of the biggest oil producers in the region. Anyway, sorry, but anyway, so Keir Starmer went there, and he committed the UK to slashing their emissions by 81% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels. And just to give you some context, the UK on a per capita basis is at 150-year low in emissions, okay? And they're just committed to doing this net zero thing, which is, in my view, not only ridiculous, but never going to happen. And it's amazing. And that's it. So the world is going one way and the UK is doubling down, going the other way.
So Rich, what are they going to, like, what are their goals? Like, how are they going to power their grid? Like, have they come out explicitly and said, okay, we're shutting down this coal plant and we're opening up, a new solar farm, or, are they giving any direction there?
Yeah. So it's, I mean, in their view, it's only wind and solar, right? Because everybody hates nuclear, because everybody hates physics and science for some, I don't understand. But anyway, so it's just, it's all about wind and solar and renewable energy and other types of renewable energy and tidal and all the rest. That's basically a red herring. It's really wind and solar. And we've seen the results of it. UK had one of the biggest increases in energy prices. And it was an article in the FT just a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember the exact number, but UK energy prices are the highest. If it's not Germany, then it's the UK. And it's basically a ritual suicide, a act of self-harm, whatever you want, on sort of this altar of emissions.
What percentage of the grid then right now is from renewables?
Well, that's the joke, right? So and you can Google this. There's amazing websites these days where you can just, I think it's carbonintensity.org or whatever it is. Just Google carbon intensity, and they have them for every single country in the EU and Canada. And so sometimes, yes, the grid is fully powered by renewables, which is remarkable, and they should be applauded for it. And then sometimes, like a couple of weeks ago, there's no wind and it's cloudy, and it's just natural gas and all of the energy. So it's either natural gas, which gets turned on to make up for the lack of wind, or they import energy from across the channel, which is nuclear from nuclear power from France, and et cetera, across across the channel. So Belgium and Netherlands or whatever it is. And so that's really the issue, and you can see it. It's very, very cyclical depending on the weather. These renewables are intermittent, and there's no hydro in the UK.
Kind of wonder on, like, again, I'm by no means an energy expert, but I certainly, just from, I don't know, maybe like common sense, but I kind of wonder how devastating these solar farms are and these wind farms on the environment. Like, just the waste, there's been so many stories out there of these solar panel farms. They get wrecked in a hailstorm, and where do they go? They just end up in a landfill somewhere. All the big, massive wind turbines that are having to get replaced all the time, and they just end up in a junk pile somewhere.
I mean, I think that I mean, I can't speak to that.
I mean, again, I don't know. I just, you know what I mean? Like, it's I'm just curious if that's really crosses anyone's mind, if you really scale this up, of how much waste is in that industry.
I mean, I think there's a lot of waste in that industry. I think that industry people lie about it. There's a huge subsidies, and I think that's really important. But even if these things were perfect, let's say, they're just not fit for purpose because of the nature of wind and solar. And you can see, there's like loads of really fantastic websites, so you can see how the emissions, the grid in the UK changes over time. And you can see that some days the wind and solar do a great job. They meet the demand perfectly. And other days they're zero. And I think that's fundamentally, we need to reconcile with that sort of mismatch of demand and supply if we're going to move forward. And I think it'll end badly, let's just say. But
Well,
it'll be interesting.
Boomer, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm just calculating my target price for the British pound, and it's about it's about 127 points away from my target right now.
It's getting close.
Yeah.
What about the CAD?
Yeah, it's again, like let's we should expect a reversal in all these markets right now. It's not just CAD, but in equities and credit and crypto as well.
No.
Gold, if you're following gold, for example, gold has rolled over. So that's having its reversal that has taken place. But back to the currency world, again, this trend we're headed towards right now, with all the new policies that are going to be implemented by President Trump, it should be very bullish for the US dollar. So by default, it's negative for CAD, Euro, and all these other markets. And the more policies that are created in other countries, including Canada, that is negative for foreign capital to come in, it should make this weakness in the currency even
I guess
greater.
the one key, sorry to interrupt you, just the one counter argument there is, I know that Vice President Vance has been very outspoken about getting the US dollar down, weakening the US dollar. And again, I know a lot of that is just grandstanding and talk.
Yeah, I'm not
but
sure.
I am curious about how strong of a dollar that
Yeah, it's very important. If you have the VP or if you have the president, make a view on the currency in any country, it does have a view with it. It does have an impact on those markets.
It's like how many countries have they accused in his past presidency of being currency manipulators, right? I mean, they were very aggressive on China. Yeah, I know. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm playing devil's advocate of.
So I remember back in 2010 or 09 when Tim Geithner, when he was the Finman down for the Americans. Obama's boy. Yeah, he was kind of very aggressive towards the Chinese, calling them a currency manipulator. And I think you're splitting hairs. I think everyone is a currency manipulator.
Oh, for sure.
And I think the Americans are the biggest currency manipulator, but it's simply a function of who they are, right? And then again, if the Americans really wanted to turn the lights off in China, they just have to cancel HSBC's banking license. I mean, that's it. If they do that, the flow of dollars, into China through Hong Kong is over. And this is a fact. HSBC, they got caught similar to another bank, allegedly laundering money, for the Mexican drug cartels. Uh, so if it does go down the wrong road between the Americans and the Chinese, whether it's because of conflict whether it's through Taiwan or the Philippines, uh, the policymakers now in place, they fully understand how big of a stick the US dollar is. And they could turn that switch off immediately. They're not going to do it to Canada. I mean, we're not at risk here of coming into crosshairs in from that world. But the whole currency manipulation argument, I don't think Canada is in that camp. And if we were, the Americans don't even know we're here. Like we're not even on their.
They might roll over and squash us.
Yeah, we're not even on the pitch with these guys, right? So anyway, that's what do you think? What are you hearing that's different from that?
Me? Oh no, I'm totally focused on this carbon intensity app. I found it. Your answer, Steve, was 52.9% is natural gas, and you can see here. There it is.
Is that in the UK?
Yeah, in the UK. There's an amazing app built by Oxford University.
What about Canada?
I don't know Canada.
Hurry up. 3, 2.
Anyways, wind is in 9%. Obviously, it's only 6 o'clock, by the way, in the UK right now. And wind is 9%, biomass 7.3. You can Google it yourself. It's an amazing app. There you go.
Still one of my favorite interviews to date on the Loonie Hour has been the Green Chicken Doomberg.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of their work there. So anyways, I think that's a good place to leave it. As always, guys, we appreciate the support, and we'll see you next week.